Hey everyone, welcome back. You won't believe what happened in today's story. My fiancé and I met each other through mutual friends 4 years ago. We were at a small get-together, and I saw her from across the room and introduced myself. At the time, she was actually in a relationship with someone else, so she politely declined my invitation for dinner. About a month later, I got a text message from an unknown number, only to see that it was her, and she was single and hoped I was still interested. I was glad that she reached out. I hadn't been pining over her during the time we were apart or anything, but I was very interested in her before I knew she was with someone else. We went out and had a good time together. Things continued from there. I proposed to her on New Year's Eve in front of all of our friends. It was super romantic, and I knew that a lot of people saw our relationship as one to look up to. I thought I found my soulmate. My fiancé had a best friend. We'll call her Kate, and she was always at our apartment. I didn't usually mind because Kate and I got along well. I know that she was one of the most important people in my fiancé's life, so I wasn't going to say or do anything to upset her about it. I know that my fiancé was close with Kate's family as well. She and Kate met each other during college, and because my fiancé's family was out of state, Kate would invite her to Thanksgiving and Christmases and things like that. From what I understand, she was accepted as part of the family pretty quickly. I even met Kate's family on a few occasions because they wanted to meet me to see if they approved of me marrying my fiancé. It was all a little much from time to time, but I loved my fiancé, and I got along well with them all. Kate's family was seemingly perfect on the outside, but they had their troubles. One day, my fiancé came to me and told me that Kate's parents were getting divorced. She was upset about it, almost like they were her own parents going through separation. Honestly, I did think that was a little weird, but I knew how close they all were. One day, I got home from work, and I saw that my fiancé had a bag packed and was carrying it out to the car with Kate. I asked what was going on, and she told me that had come over upset, and they were going to her parents' house to console her father. He was apparently very upset and had been handling the separation very poorly. She told me I didn't need to go along, that I should just stay home and relax while she was away. I said goodbye to her, and aside from texting every now and then over the weekend, I didn't hear from her until she came back the following Monday. When I asked her about what happened, she seemed hesitant to tell me. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured she must have just had a stressful or emotional weekend because of her connection to the family. She told me that Kate's dad was a mess, and it was hard to see him that way. I felt bad for her because I knew she cared about him. I gave her a hug and tried to reassure her that there was a reason for everything, and if they thought divorce was the best option, then they were doing what was good for them. A couple of weeks went by, and my fiancé told me that she was going back to Kate's parents' house. I was a little taken aback by her telling me that again. By no means did I think that Kate's dad would have just been over what was happening, but my fiancé going back over a second time seemed a little excessive. She came back the following Monday, and since then, she had been texting with Kate's dad often. It didn't really bother me when I first realized they were talking regularly. He was 20 years older than her and her best friend's father. I thought that she was happy with me and just reaching out to a friend to make sure they were okay. It started to be a problem when I heard her talking to him on the phone one day. I was supposed to be at work, but I forgot my reading glasses at home, so I ran to grab them on my lunch break. I overheard her in our bedroom talking to somebody and obviously flirting. She was giggling and laughing at the other end hysterically. I listened for a minute before I opened the bedroom door to see what was going on. She was on the phone and lying on the bed in a towel. When she saw me, she hung up and asked me why I was there. I asked her who she was talking to, and she told me that it was Kate's dad. I was surprised to hear that because it didn't seem like an appropriate time for her to be calling him. I asked about what was so funny, and she started explaining an inside joke they had to me. Honestly, even if I wasn't on the joke, I don't think I would have thought it was that funny. After seeing that, I was suspicious that there was something else going on. He had been taking up a significant part of our lives, seemingly out of nowhere, and after evaluating everything, I thought it was a problem. I didn't want to accuse my fiancé outright of having something with him, so I figured I would keep an eye on it. That very same weekend, She told me that she was going to Kate's dad's house again. I asked her if Kate was going, and she told me that Kate was meeting her there. I thought it was strange, because normally when they went, Kate would come to her house and they would drive together. I didn't understand why they were doing that again. My suspicions were raised again. I didn't say anything instead. I told her to drive safely and thought about what I wanted to do. My gut was telling me that their relationship was more than just platonic, and I thought that I needed to prove that in some way. My fiancée didn't use much social media. All of her communication was through her text messages, and she brought her phone with her. I had never been to Kate's parents' house, so I had no idea how to find her while she was there. The thought occurred to me that if my fiancé was doing something with Kate's dad, she wouldn't have told Kate she was going there. That might mean that Kate was still at her house. I grabbed my keys and drove right over. I saw her car in the driveway, which was not a good sign. That alone confirmed a lot of my suspicions. I tried to figure out what I was going to say, and then I knocked on the door. She was surprised to see me because I was apparently supposed to be going to my parents' house that weekend. At least, that's what my fiancé told her. It was clear that my fiancé lied to both us, so she could go off and do something on her own. I explained to Kate everything that I knew about her going to her dad's house. Kate was visibly pissed when I said that. I asked her why she was so upset, and she told me that she asked my fiancé not to see him anymore. She had been sensing something between them and didn't want my fiancé to throw away her relationship with me. On top of that, she didn't want her best friend to be messing around with her dad. She told me that we needed to go and see what was going on for ourselves. I followed her to his house and nervously anticipated what we would both find when we got there. Kate stormed out of her car when we arrived and saw my fiancé's car in the driveway. She had a key to get in, so she opened the door for us. We could tell that something was going on there. There were candles lit and glasses of wine sitting on the table. We heard music playing in the bedroom, and Kate asked me to go in because she didn't want to see her father having sex. I didn't want to see it either, but I took one for the team. I opened the door, and I found them right in the middle of sleeping together. Kate's dad thought I was an intruder at first, but then Kate yelled from around the corner for him to put his pants on and go out to the living room. We waited for them there, and both of them came out to find us after they got dressed. My fiancée looked like she had just been told she only had a day to live. She was distraught that I discovered her affair. She begged me to forgive her without even telling me anything about it. She tried to tell me that it was a mistake, but it seemed like something she had been planning for some time if it hadn't been going on already. Right there, I told her that the wedding was off, and I asked for the ring back. I told her that we could no longer live together either. I wanted her out of the house as soon as possible. Kate's dad tried to explain and say that she was there for him, and it just happened. Absolutely none of Weissall walking into that house made it seem like it was an accident. Neither of them could take responsibility for what they'd done. Kate was furious with both of them and told them that she didn't want to talk to them ever again. I figured it would be easier for her to cut off my fiancé, but her father I imagined would be more difficult. Honestly, I doubted she would not speak to him ever again, but their relationship would never be the same, and that would suck for them both. Kate and I eventually left and went back to her house. We unwound and got completely trashed that night. While we were drinking, she told me about all the things my fiancé told her about our relationship. Apparently, my fiancé was very interested in the security that I could give her. She wasn't necessarily interested in me for my looks, personality, or the amount of love I had for her. She told me that I could do better and hoped that I would get away from my fiancé. I had every intention of doing that. So, we broke off the engagement entirely, and my fiancé was forced to move out of my house. I don't know where she went after that. Kate was her best friend in the world, and most of her friends were also close with Kate. I'm sure none of them were happy that she slept with Kate's dad. It was quite the betrayal on her end. I do keep in contact with Kate, and she told me that she does not speak to her father. She is open to reconciling in the future, but there has been a lot of damage done, and she needs time to heal from that. So, he lost his entire family in a short amount of time. Opie, I would venture to say that your girlfriend had a crush on Kate's dad for a while before the divorce. She probably used his emotional state as an excuse to get close to him in some way. That's why she was so eager to go along all this time she went to visit him with Kate. It's unclear if the time they were caught was the first time they had been together, but it wouldn't surprise me if they had hooked that first night when you mentioned her being distant. It's nice that you and Kate are still friends after going through something like that. I know she was best friends with your fiancé while you were together, so a lot of the things she knew she probably couldn't tell you. But it was good of her to tell you the truth about your fiancé when she could. It was at least a good gesture to ensure you didn't go back with somebody toxic like that. Deciding to get married is difficult, and it might be easy to think all relationships could end up like this. But I hope you're able to find someone in the future who doesn't lie and will make sure the relationship is honest. Now, let's move on to our next story. My wife and I have been together for about 15 years. We met in the workplace, and we quickly found out that we enjoyed each other's company. We decided that we wanted to go on a date to see if our relationship could be more than platonic. While we were together, we had an incredible time and we started dating. Fast forward 15 years, we had two wonderful children, a house in the suburbs, a vacation house at the shore, and a perfect little life. I thought she was the perfect partner. She was always there for me when I was stressed out, and she was an incredible homemaker for our children. We decided that being a stay-at-home mom was going to be the best for our needs, so I took care of the family financially, and she did in every other way. The beginning of the end for us came when my wife had a bad fall. She managed to tear one of the ligaments in her knee and had to keep it in a brace for quite some time before going to physical therapy. Things were a bit different at the house with her limited mobility, but I stepped up and did everything I could to keep things as normal as possible. She seemed to appreciate everything that I did to take care of her when she was having difficulty doing it herself. After all, we made vows that said in sickness and in health, and I took that seriously. The time came for her to start going to physical therapy, and she had to go through it alone. This was at a point during a pandemic when only patients could go into medical practices. However, my wife did have a couple of Zoom consultations with her physical therapist, so I got to meet him during those. He seemed like a nice young guy. He was newly graduated, and he seemed eager to grow his client roster. He had a lot of technical knowledge, but I wasn't certain he had hands-on experience. I was apprehensive about him at first, but my wife raved about him after her first in-person session. If she was happy with him, that was good enough for me. She was the one going through the therapy, so that was the only opinion that mattered. She needed to go through several weeks of physical therapy so she could safely walk around without a brace on. It was a long-time commitment for her, and I knew she had been very nervous about the pain, but we were all very excited to get things back to normal. When I thought everything was going to be good, she told me that she had to do a couple more weeks of therapy. She had improved a lot, but the physical therapist didn't think it was in her best interest to take the brace off entirely. I was a little frustrated about it. I didn't understand why it was taking as long as it was, but then again, I wasn't the expert. On top of that, my wife told me that the time slot for her therapy had changed. She had normally been doing it while I was off work, so I could drive her there and back. The time change was in the middle of the day while I was working. She assured me that driving wasn't going to be an issue since she was doing so much better. It was a lot of minor changes that kind of frustrated me, but I didn't think she was sleeping with her physical therapist. Being the supportive husband that I was, one day I took an early lunch to go check on her at the physical therapy office. At that point, I was allowed to sit in the waiting room while she was in the back. I checked in, letting the receptionist know that I was there for my wife. I sat down for a couple of minutes, and the receptionist asked me if I had the right appointment time. I told her that my wife was supposed to be back there already, and she had an appointment with the physical therapist. The receptionist told me that the therapist I mentioned was out of the office for lunch, so I must have had the wrong time. I thought it was really strange. I never imagined that my wife would be cheating on me. I tried to rationalize it in my head to make it make sense in some way. I drove home, not expecting her to be there at all. However, her car was in the driveway. I was relieved to see that. If her car was home, that might have meant that she ended up rescheduling the therapy appointment or canceling altogether. I walked inside, and I found her in the kitchen having sex with the physical therapist. I was in complete shock. Honestly, looking back, It felt like my soul left my body at that moment. I was crushed to see it with my own eyes. They didn't even notice me for a couple of moments before my wife looked over at me and quickly pushed the physical therapist off of her. I didn't know what to say to either of them. All I knew was that I needed to get out of there. I rushed out to my car and sat there for a minute trying to figure out what I wanted to do. Going back to work wasn't an option, not after what I just saw. My wife came running out of the house, and she banged on my car window for me to open it. After a moment, I rolled it down and listened to what she had to say. She swore up and down that it was the first time anything happened between them. She made it seem like it just happened as if that made it okay. I was putting the pieces together in my head slowly, and that didn't add up with everything else. She had rescheduled her therapy time to his lunch hour. On top of that, I saw her run out of the house without a brace on, so she clearly didn't need therapy anymore. She had mistold me completely and lied to my face. I told her that I needed some time alone to think, and I drove off. I booked a room at a hotel in town, and I took the time alone there to consider my options. I couldn't be with somebody who would cheat on me. It just wasn't an option. The trust in our relationship was completely gone after that. Divorce was a messy option, but it was the only one I could see. I looked online for some good divorce attorneys and tried to snag up the best one before my wife could. I had a meeting with her, and we started to get the paperwork together so I could officially serve my wife with the papers. Meanwhile, the physical therapist who slept with my wife needed to lose his job. Sleeping with a patient was extremely unethical, and he could potentially lose his license over something like that. I considered that maybe that would be wrong because he was young and new in the industry, but I wanted to get revenge. I reached out to the practice that he worked for, and I told them about what happened. They were appalled when they heard it. They assured me that he would be properly dealt with. When I went back to my house and started packing up some of my belongings, my wife confronted me about that. She said that because she was technically still a patient there, he could lose his license, and that would be ruining his entire life. She was angry with me for telling the truth to his employer. After everything that happened, they were still in contact with each other. I didn't care at all. I gave her the divorce papers and packed some of my things to leave. We did eventually get divorced, and it was a bit of a mess. She tried to fight me on everything, but because we signed a prenuptial agreement where infidelity would void a lot of things, she wound up with nothing. I got to keep the house, both of our cars, and most of our assets. I didn't need to pay her any spousal support or child support. Because I was the provider, I had custody of the children, and she had visitation rights. Her entire life had been ruined because she had the hots for her physical therapist. So was his. I hope it was worth it for them in the end. Opie, from what you described, it sounds like you had immense trust in your wife, and she completely shattered that. It's always so sad to hear someone try to make excuses for what is happening because they trust their partners so much. Your wife took advantage of your good nature. I hope the physical therapist does lose his license. Forming a sexual relationship with a patient is unethical and a breach of trust. Your wife blaming you for potentially costing him his license is frustrating. She was the one who slept with him. It would be entirely their own fault. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact me. Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. I once looked up to my cousin. I thought he was a great guy, and we were close like brothers. I was also dating a girl. I was deeply in love with her and planned to marry her someday. I thought my life was perfect. One day I came home early because a colleague offered to cover my shift. I was pretty tired, so I accepted and went home. Arriving home, I found them in my bed having sex. Both of them were shocked, to say the least. I told them I wanted them to be gone by the time I got back and left the house. They were gone by the time I did get back, but she left me a note telling me she was sorry and to call her when I calmed down. I didn't call her. I texted her saying that I'd gather her things and drop them off at my cousin's in a few days and that she was staying with him now, not me. I followed through with that. It took about a week to transfer everything. Both of them tried to apologize, but I didn't have anything nice to say to them, so I said nothing. I just knocked on the door and handed the bags to whoever answered before leaving. My cousin called me multiple times to try to apologize, but I refused to accept it. 3 years have passed since then. I went no contact with them. I didn't bring it up to the rest of my family or any of their friends. I'm not sure why. I just didn't. I got a call from a number I didn't recognize, so I answered. It was my cousin. He sounded really happy and was acting like he hadn't destroyed my life. He explained he and my ex were getting married and he wanted me to be his best man. I was so angry that he had the utter gall to act like nothing was wrong and lost my temper. I yelled at him and called him names before hanging up. He sent me a text telling me the offer still stood, and if I didn't want to be his best man, then he just simply wouldn't have one. A few days passed by and I had an idea. I texted him back and apologized. I sent a paragraph of bullshit saying I was still angry, but this could be an opportunity for the three of us to heal and move past it. He was overjoyed and said he paid for everything and he'd help me pick out a suit if I wanted, which I accepted because I sure as well wasn't going to spend any money on his stupid wedding if I could help it. The wedding day came. I had spent the week prior writing a speech putting all the negative feelings that had bottled up over the years into words on paper. The wedding was pretty good. I'm sure one of them had some nice well-paying job or something, because they must have spent a decent bit of money on this wedding for how nice it was. Our entire family was there, as was a decent chunk of my ex's family. Eventually the time for my speech came. I just remember feeling really nervous as it built up to it, and my voice kept faltering when I was reading it out, but I didn't, and still don't care, at least I got it out. I explained what these two horrible people had done to me. I called them the worst names I could think of and wished them the worst. Then I left. I was expecting some kind of dramatic moment from all the guests, gasps of shock and all that, but there was none of that. Everyone was completely silent. On my way home, I got a call from my ex that I had ruined the wedding, and both of them were so upset, and she asked me why I do this. She told me after I had left that a lot of the people they had invited just couldn't look at them the same anymore. I told her that they deserved it for what they'd done to me, and everything I'd said in the speech was true. Since then, I've gotten several calls and texts from others in my ex's family offering support and telling me how sorry they were that I experienced that. I'm not sure if I feel better having done this, but it did bring me great catharsis when people were telling me the wedding was ruined. At least now they felt at the very least a fraction of what they've made me feel. I was struggling a lot, and I'd just gone back to simply functioning like I was before the wedding, after I came down from getting my own back. I don't at all regret what I did, and I still feel satisfied that I got payback. I was making plans to take my own life after what my ex did to me. I hadn't told anyone for obvious reasons but my mom, uncle, and cousin, the same cousin whose wedding I ruined. He came to me and told me they'd pay for a private counselor since the mental health department of the NHS is under-equipped, to say the least. I went to therapy, found a counselor who was very helpful. He taught me a lot. I got diagnosed with PTSD caused by the discovery of the affair. He's been a big help and has encouraged me to give casual dating a try to build confidence in myself and get used to rejection as a normal part of life. I signed up for a few dating sites, although I'm avoiding Tinder like the plague. My counselor specifically suggested I stay as far away from Tinder as I possibly can. I've not been very successful in that avenue, but it's pretty much in line with what I was expecting. I've talked to a few people and even got a date scheduled, but she stood me up and ghosted me, which hurt. I'm doing much better now mentally than I was before. In a way, I feel like what I went through has made me much stronger as a person and has taught me on how to be careful with the woman I choose to be with. Opie, when someone puts you at risk for STDs, gives you PTSD, and tosses away all the emotional and financial health you've invested in a dedicated relationship, you don't owe them a thing. You certainly did the right thing by causing a storm at their wedding. The people there deserve to know what happened. I hope you're doing better now and focusing on whatever makes you smile, and please be careful how much you let your cousin and ex back into your life. They have yet to show sufficient genuine remorse, which says a lot about their character. Matter in fact, don't let them back into your life at all. Now that you've got your revenge, I would cut them off completely and just focus on yourself and building your life back together. Thank you for sharing your story. Let's now get into our second story for today. My story actually goes back a few years, but the current situation with the pandemic has sort of brought it back to life in a way. I turned 39 last December. My girlfriend's birthday is 1 week before mine, and my daughter's falls in between, so we tend to have a birthday week celebration. We had been together for nearly 7 years at the time, married for almost 5. I thought we were very happy. The speed with which everything changed shocked me. All of this started back when I was 32 and my daughter was 4. My ex-wife was 31. My ex-wife joined a new gym because of a promotion they were having. It was a very expensive high-end place. It was after that the trouble started. The details of the cheating aren't that interesting, so I'm not going to spend much time describing it. For about 6 months, my ex-wife became distant, picking fights a lot, going out on girls' nights, etc. After about 6 months of all this, I went away on a business trip, and when I came home, my ex-wife had moved out. Maybe 2/3 of all her stuff and most of my daughter's stuff were gone. In the kitchen, there were divorce papers. The note? Nothing. She was offering 50-50 custody and didn't want any money or the house. Now, it might be important to know that at this time, I was already earning 6 figures plus bonuses and commissions. Due to some very wise investments and careful planning, I expect to be a millionaire by my 40th birthday or soon after. But I guess she wasn't willing to wait. She is a stunning and beautiful woman, so it's not too surprising she was able to meet the guy she did, especially in revealing gym clothes. I didn't know this when I found the divorce papers, but the man she left me for was already a millionaire. He was also 45. But I didn't know about the other man at the time. All I knew was my wife had left with our child and left behind divorce papers. She wasn't answering my call or anything. Her parents and siblings didn't know where she was. Eventually, I talked to her, but she didn't tell me about the other guy. She just said that she wasn't happy and she wanted to move on. After a couple of weeks, what convinced me to sign the papers was when I received an invitation to her second wedding. I signed the papers, and she remarried 3 months after leaving me. I'm giving kind of an abridged version because the details of all this aren't so unique. Once I was divorced, I got to see my daughter again, and basically, she spent half her time with me and half her time with her mother. I focused on being a better and more present father. I redoubled my efforts to work out and established a thorough exercise regimen. I took some courses about investing and trading and made a fortune. I even discovered a new hobby: woodworking. I would find used furniture, usually that had been thrown out, and I would refinish it. Eventually, I started dating again, but it was nothing too serious. I was more concerned with having another woman around my daughter. She never really warmed up to my ex-wife's second husband. My daughter often said that he tolerated her, but that wasn't. She didn't use those exact words, but that's what she described. Eventually, I met my current girlfriend. We've been together about 3 years now, living together for 2. My girlfriend is from Thailand and is 10 years younger than me. She studied therapy and worked in a spa. She and my daughter get along great, and my ex-wife is very jealous. My girlfriend and daughter enjoy spending time together in a way I don't think my ex-wife has experienced. For example, my girlfriend and daughter both have long hair and enjoy watching videos online on how to make very elaborate braids and hairstyles. My daughter enjoys this more than the expensive toys my ex-wife is always buying. Time for the plot twist. The lockdown period was not kind to my ex-wife's new husband. He worked as a business consultant and lost about 75% of his clients when the companies wanted to save money. They might hire him again in the future, but now it's tough. He still has plenty of money, but he was essentially living paycheck to paycheck. Furthermore, it turns out he was also heavily in debt. I don't know all the details, but I've heard he has hundreds of thousands of dollars in credit card debt as well as outstanding loans. He had to sell his house, and they moved into a condominium. He had sold off a lot of his assets to cover most of the costs. He is still comfortable, but their lifestyle took a drastic downgrade. The upside for me, my girlfriend, and my daughter is that my daughter has been living with us full-time for nearly a year. I happily volunteered to take her while they were dealing with their financial situation. The 3 of us have already visited my girlfriend's family in Thailand, and after the pandemic situation is over, we are going to go back and have a wedding in Thailand. We are tentatively planning on relocating to Thailand. My daughter visited Thailand with us, and we haven't fully talked about it, but she is excited about living in Thailand with us. She has even started taking Thai language lessons online. I don't know how this will work exactly, and it's not like it will happen tomorrow, but I guess I'll just have to wait and see what happens. Anyway, that's my story. I hope it can help as a source of encouragement and motivation for people going through something similar. Remember that things can get better, even after a bad situation. OP, there's a very real phenomenon at work here. A fair down. Cheaters tend to be insecure. They're often narcissistic and they need that sweet, sweet narcissistic supply to feel validated and happy. The people they choose in an affair are typically manipulative and cloying, giving your cheating ex a sense of inflated ego and cheap love that simply doesn't exist in a long-term relationship after the easygoing initial stages. Your cheating ex builds shallow relationships with people and is too self-involved and self-victimized to put in the work it takes to grow old with you bolstered by a secure and deep foundational love. I'm happy to hear that you're doing well. Thank you for sharing your story, and I wish you the absolute best going forward. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also comment below with your thoughts on what happened. Hey everyone! Welcome back to the channel. I was married to my ex-wife for almost 3 years, but we had to go out separate ways due to her infidelity. My ex-wife and I grew up in the same town, so we weren't complete strangers when we started dating. We even went to the same high school, but I was a couple of classes ahead of her, and we didn't get close to each other until after college. From the beginning, I didn't want to leave our town for greener pastures or anything. I loved it there and always wanted to be close to the people who mattered. The same applied to my ex-wife. She returned to overlook her parents' restaurant after she graduated from college, and that's when our relationship started. We became perfect friends after she returned, and some months after we got to know each other better, we started dating. Since we all lived in a small town, everyone knew we were in a relationship and possibly would end up marrying each other, and that's precisely what happened. After a year and 7 months of being in a relationship, we got married and had a beautiful wedding. I worked as a carpenter and earned a decent amount of money monthly, so I gave my ex-wife the kind of wedding she wanted. It wasn't so big, but it was what she wanted, and everything turned out as planned. After we got married, we went on our honeymoon, but just 2 days after we left, we had to return because her mother passed away in her sleep. It was a very tough season for both of us, and the first year of our marriage was filled with mourning. She was an only child, and I imagined how terrible she must have felt to lose her mother like that. Meanwhile, I supported her in any way I could. I grieved with her, cared for her, and was there for her at all times. It wasn't how I wanted us to start our marital journey, but since death was something no one could predict or stop, I could do nothing. My ex-wife started coming out of her shell in the second year of our marriage. Because of her loss, she had become a shadow of herself and lost interest in many things. When this happened, I was so glad and looked forward to having the kind of marriage I always imagined. The first year had been very tough for me, and I loved her so much and didn't want to break our vows. I expected that our relationship/marriage would be fixed after she got over her mother's death, but that didn't happen. I felt like she was cold to me, and even if we got intimate, I didn't feel the spark we used to have while we were dating. Most times, it felt like I was forcing myself on her, and it kept getting worse that I had to do some research online. With my research, I learned a lot of things and understood why she acted that way. I knew I had to give her time, and it felt like we were drifting apart the more time I gave her. I didn't enjoy the first 2 years of my marriage, but I had to stay because I expected her to snap out of that state and change. One time, I even confronted her about her change in character and how I wasn't enjoying our marriage, but she called me selfish and insensitive. The very annoying part was that if we went out to a wedding, gathering, or whatever event we were attending, she would be very active, laugh at funny and dry jokes, and interact with people like everything was cool with her. But as soon as we got home, she would change. Our marriage was getting very boring, and after constantly nagging about her attitude for weeks, I started to see a few changes. She became more active at home, spent time with me, and we started doing all the fun things we used to do as singles, but never had the opportunity to do in our marriage because of the tragedy that struck. Sincerely, her changes made me feel loved, and throughout that time, our marriage was shaky and she was grieving. I never tried to play smart with or look at any woman in a way I shouldn't have. I'll admit there were temptations, especially since I wasn't getting what I wanted, and our conversations were so boring, but I loved her so much, and I knew what a 5-minute mistake could do to our marriage. Our home was filled with happiness and laughter for the following months, and I enjoyed her company so much. The icing on the cake was when we found out she was pregnant, and I was so excited I would become a father. It meant so much to me. Overall, I was glad I was finally having the marriage of my dreams. About 6 months after my ex-wife found out she was pregnant, I decided to make things up to her. I knew the news of her mother's death had ruined our honeymoon, and even though she never mentioned it, I knew she would love to return to the same place. It was expensive, but I started saving for it 2 months after things returned to normal. After all the bookings and preparations were made, I broke the news to her, and we didn't just take it as our honeymoon, but as a romantic getaway, and she really loved it because our wedding anniversary was only a week after we'd returned from the getaway, and we planned on renewing our vows in front of friends and family. The renewal of vows was my idea, and I thought it was necessary because we were only beginning to enjoy our marriage. Eventually, we went on our second honeymoon getaway and had so much fun together. We visited places, took multiple pictures, and most importantly, tried different foods. We were only meant to spend a week there, and on our 6th day there, I made a shocking discovery. I can't really recall what took me to my ex-wife's phone. I think she was gisting me about the news that went viral on Facebook, and since I wasn't on Facebook then, she gave her phone to me so I could read it. Then she went into the bathroom to shower, and because I wasn't very interested in the news, I pressed the return key and it opened her text messages. I know I shouldn't have read her messages, but I couldn't resist the temptation. It was my first time doing so. There was a name saved as my happiness in Spanish, and it piqued my curiosity, so I opened the message, and to my greatest surprise, it was our former wedding planner. There were also a lot of pictures shared between them, nudes, pictures of them together in bed, and photos of them kissing each other. Another thing was they had been dating each other for 2 years under my nose, and a month after our wedding anniversary was their second anniversary. At that point, I felt the room spin and my chest almost exploded from being too tight. I would really love to explain how I felt, but no amount of words can describe it. I'm still somewhat surprised that I was smart enough to forward all their messages to my number in that state of shock and delete all that I sent to my phone so she wouldn't know. Honestly, the rest of our romantic getaway was ruined, and there was a change in my attitude too. I was so worried that the child she was carrying wasn't mine, and for nights I did not sleep well or think straight. I even missed working on most of my clients' projects because I was not in the right mind. Meanwhile, I kept everything in and did not confront her about anything. She was so engrossed with our small renewal of vows party that she thought I was having mood swings again. So, on our anniversary, we did our thing, and I was patient enough for our vows to be renewed. They didn't mean anything to me anymore, and after we were done, I asked that the gifts I got for her be brought in so she could open them in front of everyone. Anyone who saw the size of the gifts could tell they were framed pictures, but maybe she thought they were pictures from our second honeymoon. I asked for the photos to be given to her so she could open it herself, and she did. Immediately, she opened it. Everyone gasped and she froze. I asked her to open the second one, and she reluctantly opened it with tears in her eyes. Then I opened the last one myself. All 3 pictures were of her and our former wedding planner, in bed, naked together, and a picture of them kissing each other. Funnily enough, he was in attendance, and his wife and children were there too, since we were close in some way. I felt so satisfied to expose my ex-wife and embarrass her in front of everyone. Then I told her it was over between us, and I wanted nothing to do with the child she was carrying because it was obviously not mine. She cried, begged me, and even said she didn't know how she entered an affair with him, but she was drawn to him because he comforted her more and didn't fake his grieving like I did. I was shocked to hear her say that because I sacrificed so much in her grief to be with her. It hurt, and it was more reason to get her out of my life. We divorced shortly after, and the whole town carried the news. The wedding planner's wife was so mad, too, that she divorced him, and in addition, he was forced to retire after the word spread like wildfire. I never took responsibility for the pregnancy, and the wedding planner said it wasn't his until DNA proved it was. It still hurts me whenever I remember what I got in return for being patient with my ex-wife and loving her foolishly. I haven't healed yet, and the wound opens each time I see her or bump into her. It's also been 4 years, and I haven't been in another relationship since then. I don't know if I will, but I'm sure I can never love another woman the way I loved my ex-wife. That part of me is gone. Opie, many men would not have renewed their vows with their spouses, especially after she did something this terrible to you. Your wife was using fake grieving as her justification to cheat on you. No matter what you did for her, she would never have appreciated it. I'm glad she is out of your life for good. You don't deserve such negativity. Thank you for sharing your story with us. Now, let's move on to the second story of the day. My wife and I were what you'll call the perfect couple. We loved each other so much and attended events, gatherings, weddings, church, and other social gatherings. Like I mentioned at the beginning of my story, we attended the same church, and being that she was a very devoted Christian, attended church all the time, and didn't live the kind of lifestyle other women on social media did, I believed she was the one for me. I liked her from the moment I set my eyes on her, and because she was the only woman I was attracted to since I moved into the city, I thought it was wise to talk to a couple of people before we became a thing, and they all guaranteed me she was a great girl. Indeed, she was a great girl. She was well-mannered, polite, pretty, and kind to other people, including strangers. She was a college graduate and worked as a vet assistant in one of the biggest vet shops in town. On my end, I worked with a marketing firm, and I built websites as a side job. Eventually, I got closer to her after observing her for a while, and we ended up dating. We dated for only a year, and we got married. Initially, I thought I was making one of the best decisions of my life, but after things turned out the way they did, I realized I made a terrible mistake. After my wife and I got married, we had a son after a year, and our life seemed perfect. We were one big happy family, and I did my best to look after our son. Despite how much I tried to keep my family together and give them a good life, something always had to go wrong. The first thing that happened was that our 6-month-old son broke his left arm while my wife cared for him one weekend. That Saturday, I went to hang out with a couple of friends and then stopped to get groceries on my way back. When I got home, the first thing I heard was the loud cry of our son, and when I rushed to check what was going on, I met my wife, trying to stop him from crying. According to her, she wanted to grab something from a neighbor's house, so she asked my 7-year-old nephew, who came over to stay with us that weekend, to look after the baby, and in the process of playing with our son while she was away, he broke his arm. I don't really get how. Maybe my nephew must have pulled his arm too hard, or tried to throw him and grab him like we did in his presence. Funnily enough, when I returned home, my wife was all dressed, and it was odd for her to visit a neighbor looking all dressed. I suspected something was off, but at that time, what was most important was getting our son back to good health, and achieving that took a while. By the time our son had recovered fully, the matter had died, and I could not bring it up again. Although I tried to question my nephew, he was slightly shaken by what had happened, and his side of the story was not coordinating with my wife's. About a year after that, I noticed that my wife and I grew distant. We were both working hard to make ends meet, but it wasn't like our jobs changed. We still did the same job, worked the same hours, and split chores at home, and even though I was a bit difficult at times, I still loved her and treated her well. The reason we had issues was because she was just too careless and dirty. It was crazy for me to come home and see our son's removed diaper on a dirty plate in the sink, and the whole kitchen smelled terrible. There are also some things I cannot say here because of how embarrassing it was. Aside from her carelessness and not being as tidy as I wanted, we had no other issues. I also tried to make up to her whenever I started our fights and arguments, so she wouldn't think I was maltreating or nagging her because of our age difference. All this while, I never thought my wife would cheat on me until I saw things with my own eyes. It was devastating because I loved her more than I loved myself, and I sacrificed a lot to make her happy. That day, I came home from work about an hour earlier because I wasn't feeling well. When I got home, I noticed that our repairman's company truck was parked in my driveway, which was odd, and because his vehicle was in the driveway, I was forced to park behind him. When getting to my porch, I heard very loud moaning from my living room, and I immediately knew what was happening. To be sure of what I heard, I pushed the door open with force, and my eyes saw something I couldn't get out of my head to date. My wife and the repairman were doing it on our couch, and our son was in the living room watching them. I was so mad that I grabbed our son first before I kicked the repairman out of our house, and I yelled at my wife to join him, but she refused. She begged me, knelt down, and cried like she was innocent. She held my legs and even rolled on the floor if that wasn't enough. She told me she was sorry and didn't know what made her do it. She even tried to lie about it being their first time, but I was sure it wasn't. Without me saying it, she knew our next step would be a divorce, and before I even voiced it, she started begging me not to divorce her. She knew she had a reputation to keep, and that's why she begged me not to divorce her. I also knew she wanted our marriage, so I played a smart one on her. I told her I wouldn't divorce her if she told her friends, family, and the church the absolute truth about her affair with the repairman, and she agreed. I kicked her out of the house and took our son from her to avoid making her feel comfortable with the crime she had committed. Meanwhile, while the repairman was around, I threatened to report him to the organization he worked for, and I did. I had heard stories of repairmen and pizza delivery boys having affairs with married women, but I thought it was made up until it happened to me. Long story short, she exposed herself, and it turned out she was having an affair with him since the time our baby broke his arm. She lied and said she had gone out to get something from a neighbor, but in reality, she went out with him, leaving our son behind with a 7-year-old. When everyone heard this, they were so disappointed, and I still filed for a divorce and used her evidence against her in court. I also mentioned the part where she had our son in the living room while she was doing it with the repair guy, and I mentioned how careless she was to leave our baby with another child, which resulted in a broken arm. With all that presented, I won custody of our son. Meanwhile, her parents were so disappointed that they disowned her and wanted nothing to do with her anymore. Since then, she has been living with their rejection, and as for the repairman, his company fired him, but I don't know if they carried on with their affair. The church had to suspend her for a while, but I left the church and moved to a different house. This happened 2 years ago, and right now, I have met someone who also has a daughter around my son's age, and we are taking care of the kids together. Oh, V, I'm sorry you had to go through this. The truth is, most times, marrying a woman or devoted Christian from the church does not guarantee she will be faithful to you. Meeting a loyal partner has nothing to do with the church. It has more to do with the person's personality. Know that you just dodged a bullet. If she said she didn't know why she did it, then she could get confused again in the future. For now, focus on your new significant other and how to take care of the kids together, and make sure you heal properly so you don't think every woman you meet will be the same. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also, comment below with your thoughts on what happened. If there is a story you would like to share with me about your own situation or someone else's, then please do not hesitate to contact. Hey everyone, welcome back. You won't believe what I discovered after my wife returned from vacation. My wife and I were married for 10 years. I was her first, and I thought, only sexual partner. We married at 22 years old, and when the story I'm about to tell you took place, we were 32. I was told she went on a vacation with her sister, but throughout the week she was gone, her responses became weird and less frequent. I was already worried by the time she got back, and my fears were only confirmed by her very strange behavior. She said she didn't feel well, and this was right before COVID reached the US, so she made a doctor's appointment. After that one, she went to a second one, but wouldn't tell me what was going on. I was in the dark and cared about my wife. I wanted answers, so I decided to search her car for appointment summaries or anything that might give me some clues. In her car, I found an open STD test and a visit summary from her doctor that said she tested positive for herpes. I started shaking and didn't want to believe it. I sat in her car for a while, staring at the trees around me. I obviously couldn't sleep with my wife again. Then I got scared I already had it. I went to stay with my mom for a few days while I waited for my own test results. My wife barely noticed my absence because she was dealing with her own problems. Thank God my test results were clean. She didn't get it from me or give it to me. Now I could address the issue at hand. My wife had to face reality. I was already irritated that she didn't tell me anything about it. I had lots of questions, but they didn't really need answering. I didn't really need to know how she got herpes, only that she did, while she was on vacation with her sister. Her sister worked with her in the same office, which gave me an idea. I received an email invite to a work party, and attached to that email were all the emails of her coworkers and bosses. I emailed everyone a picture of my wife's diagnosis, with a text that said my wife brought home a present from vacation. The response was astounding. Before my wife realized what I did, her sister called me. She asked what was going on, and I told her all about it. She admitted that she wasn't with my wife the whole time they were gone. At first, she thought I was being really unfair by sharing my wife's private issue with her work crew, but after I vented to her about it and brought up the impending divorce, she sided with me. Just then, my wife came outside and banged on the car window. She looked furious and terrified. She screamed and cried inaudible words. I got out of the car and she started hitting me, but stopped when I told her she cheated on me. She couldn't keep it together. She was overwhelmed and probably hadn't even let the reality of her STD or infidelity sink in. I told her she cheated on me while on vacation and got herpes. She betrayed me, and now I would never sleep with her again. She cried breathlessly, tried saying sorry, tried saying she used protection, but none of it mattered, and I think she knew that. She went back inside the house, defeated after I told her to pack her stuff. Her sister came over because she was on the phone for some of our confrontations. She helped her pack and calmed her down by talking about the future she could have. All the motivation left her when she tried to go to work. She received so much backlash and shame for what she did to me. Whether it was to her face or notes left on her desk, she was insulted, called out, and slandered. She only worked for one day after vacation before quitting. Her sister's been really quiet, and as far as I know, she still lives with her. It wouldn't surprise me if she quit dating for a while, or even had trouble forgiving herself. I know I lucked out and dodged a bullet by doing my own investigation and separating myself from her while I figured out what I needed to know. I hope she uses protection and tells people about her diagnosis and cheating habits. Opie, I am so sorry your wife completely disrespected you and spat on your trust. She'll have trouble living this mistake down. You were a trusting husband that let her go on vacation without you in good faith. She took advantage of you by sleeping with another man, and it's only karma that she got an STD. I am so glad she didn't try to seduce you upon her return before you knew what was happening. You really did dodge a bullet with this one. I'm glad to hear she couldn't hide her diagnosis and had to face the shame she deserved for betraying her husband. Any woman who believes she needs another man to love her needs a serious reality check. Love is designed to be true between two people that openly communicate and choose to love the other no matter what. Quite the opposite of taking advantage of the trust your spouse gives you. I wish you the best of luck. You've absolutely did the right thing and acted on your wisdom to figure out what was going on. Thank you for sharing your story. Now, let's get into today's second story. Last Valentine's Day with my wife, 33, was the end of our 7-year marriage. She was supposed to get off work at 5, but at 4:50 she texted me to say her aunt has a date for Valentine's, and since she has trouble finding dates, she felt obligated to babysit her kids for her. I, 40, said that was fine and I could meet her there. She told me that wouldn't be necessary. Her aunt was weird about having men at her house because her children were in recovery from their abusive father, who had been out of the picture for some time now. This conversation really bummed me out, but I figured if my wife could be so self-sacrificing on this romantic day, then I could for an hour. I believed my wife's story, but then she posted a status update that gave her location. She thought ahead and made it so neither I nor our mutual friends could see her post, but she forgot about one person. Her 15-year-old cousin, the girl she was supposed to be babysitting. She actually messaged me to ask how I was doing and gave me some disconcerting news. She showed me the screenshot of my wife's status and location, which said she was having a wonderful Valentine's Day at an upscale restaurant. Her cousin was one heck of a snoop and knew something was amiss because my wife didn't tag me or include a picture of her and I together like she always did. Due to the inconsistencies, she decided to show me. She didn't know that my wife used her as a lie in the babysitting ruse, but I left that part out and just thanked her. I checked the family locator app, which we both never thought about since we were always together and my wife's cell phone was no longer at the restaurant. She was in a neighborhood. I decided to see what other snooping I could manage, so I messaged one of my wife's coworkers on Facebook. She didn't hesitate to tell me that something was probably going on with her and a guy from the office. She said they would often deliver work papers to each other's cubicle, but she believed they were handwritten notes. They also ate lunch together in the small office kitchen every day. It seems they were trying to make it look like they were only coworkers, but there was something more to it. I couldn't believe how easy it was to gather intel from people had I been blind. I wanted to check my wife's phone, but since I couldn't, I told her coworker about her Valentine's Day lie and how she was in a different neighborhood at that very moment. She asked if it was the Sunny Day development, and I was shocked that it was. She said AP lived there. She was at his house once for a party. I showed her the exact spot my wife's icon hovered over the neighborhood, and she said it was definitely close enough to be his house. I had enough. I thanked her and got off social media. I started throwing my wife's clothes and belongings out the window. Loose clothes were strewn all over the yard and roof. It started raining before she got home, and I thought karma was just giving me an extra hand. I wrote a note to put on our front door that read, "Happy Valentine's Day. Don't bother coming back ever again." When she got home late, I could hear her screaming and freaking out. She banged on the door, rang the doorbell a whole bunch, but I barricaded myself inside. I heard her on the phone with her mom and then her dad, and from what I could hear, it sounded like they couldn't believe she was locked out of her own house with her clothes all over the yard. She kept saying she didn't know why, but eventually broke down and said she lied to me and had a date with someone else, so she needed her dad's help taking all her stuff somewhere. I imagine they asked her why she did this, because all she said was she didn't know, she didn't want to tell me in case I freaked out and stuff like that. She sounded like a pitiful little girl that made a shameful decision to lie and cheat on her husband, believing she could get away with it. And now she was forced to semi-admit to what she'd done over the phone with her dad, so that he could come to her rescue. He showed up and I came outside. I told them both what I found out, all while my wife was gone. She was crying and telling me I was exaggerating and jumping to conclusions. I put her on the spot to prove I was lying by showing me the messages she had with AP. I knew his real name and her face turned pale when I asked. She said she didn't have any messages with him, but I could see her father's disappointment. I asked him if he thought she was lying because he knew her the best and he was embarrassed to say yes. She started screaming and wailing and dropped to the ground. I told her to suck it up because she was a big girl who made the decision to cheat on me and lie this Valentine's Day. Now she had to face the consequences of her big girl decision. She was devastated. I could tell she didn't want our marriage to end that night. She didn't want it to end. She wouldn't ever step foot into our house again. She didn't get to say goodbye to our dog. It's lucky I never had children with her because that would have been heart-wrenching. Let this be a lesson to think through your actions before betraying the one person that matters most in your life. No actions go without repercussions. She stayed with her parents for a while, but they were extremely disappointed in her and couldn't believe a word she said. She didn't get to leave their house at all unless it was for work, and she wasn't welcome back if she was 5 minutes past her expected return. Opa. I am so sorry your wife betrayed you on Valentine's Day. Of course, it's just the same as any other day, but since it's become notorious, for true love it adds insult to injury. I'm so glad you did some sleuthing to figure out what was going on. I'm glad the girl she used as part of her lie stepped forward without even knowing your wife brought her into it. Your ex turned a kind gesture into a lie you couldn't believe. No one can maintain a relationship with that kind of dishonesty. Can you even imagine how hard it would be to have a healthy relationship with her after this? Your ex needs to mature a little and learn how important it is to remain loyal and honest in her relationships. Without that, she doesn't deserve the benefits of a romantic partnership. As hard as it was, you took the right steps to distance yourself from this girl. I wish you the best of luck. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to today's stories. If you enjoyed listening, please feel free to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Also comment below with your thoughts on what happened.